Greetings and welcome to Paint Here Now. I am Will Parody, and today we are going to continue our exploration of complementary colors, featuring today we're going to do red and green. And what we're going to do today is we're going to actually paint a landscape scene out of using just three, let's call it five colors, two types of red, two types of green, and some white. So basically red, green, and white. And we're going to paint a scene and incorporate all of the different grays and browns and awesome colors that come from mixing the complementary colors in white. So we've done this for a couple weeks, looking at all the pairs of complementary colors, which again are red and green, blue and orange, and purple and yellow, and exploring what they do. This was our first example, our first experiment with red and green. And look at all the darks, the almost blacks and grays and dark browns, beautiful, rich colors that can be useful in all kinds of ways in painting, nature, or anything. And this was without any white. This is just mixing the pure color, thinned out with some water sometimes to get some lighter tones, but no white use. And so that was our red and green. And then we took a look at red and green with some white, and you can see the big difference. And all the huge new range of colors that white makes. So it's a pretty phenomenal thing. And I think you can see looking at these how there's also a natural sort of a landscape feel that can come from these. And we're going to make some neat clouds and just see what happens. We're just going to lay some colors in a similar way to how we blend and mix when we're exercising, and see if we can make a painting out of just the colors red, green, and white. So that being said, let's get to some painting. All right, so I figured we'd take a bit of a closer look at what we've done in the past, just to get a more close-up view of some of these colors before we start painting our new piece. Darks, beautiful. I love how almost black they are. High school art teacher Mr. Stampone always used to say, mix your complements together to get your dark colors, your grays, and your shadows. Don't just use black paint. And you can see just the real rich range of colors you can get from mixing reds and greens. Then when we add a little bit of white, we get this. Really interesting. A whole new range of hues and tones. Beautiful colors, beautiful colors. And it's the same colors we used here, but just with some white. And so now we're going to start a new one. And we're going to make this kind of like a landscape piece. So let's see what happens here. First of all, let us introduce you to our ice cube tray. This is what I like to use for paint. It's great to mix the colors in, and you can put a covering over it and keep the paints dry. These are acrylic paints, water soluble. They also dry pretty quickly, so you want to keep them covered if you want to keep them wet. And we have some reds here and greens and some white. And I like to use an old jar or something for my brushes, and brushes in and use a brush like this. And we'll start painting. So as this has a little bit more intention than just mixing colors and seeing how cool they look together, and then I do want to paint some kind of a scene, I need to think about how I might start that. So one thing that I might do is start with some white. Since we're going to be mixing white into this anyways, and I might make it a little bit wet in some areas. As you can see, they're already cloudy looking. So we'll start with a little bit of that. Pretty basic. One of the things that I think is awesome about the colors that you can get from mixing your complementaries are the interesting cloud colors, the interesting sky colors. So it's kind of a gray day where I'm at here, and it's going to be sort of a gray day on this piece. So what we'll do is I'll start by adding a little bit of green on a couple of these. Green clouds? What is that? Just you wait. And then a little bit of red. And this red, I think, happens to be, I don't know if you can see the difference. It's a little bit cooler. This, I'm using a red that's not quite as orangey or warm, I guess. So we're going to mix that in with this green a little bit, kind of like what we did. Oh, that's a bit much. We might have to add some more green. And just sort of mixing it in. You can, in fact, yeah, definitely a little bit more green on the brush. In fact, I'm going to get my brush kind of like this with a little coat of green, and then mix it in. There we have some cool gray color. And we're going to add some more white. We just add the colors we need as we need them, mix that in. And just here on some of these clouds, just by like experimenting with colors. What does this happen? What happens when we mix this red and this green and so on and so forth and some white? And we get so cool. All right. They're getting a little bit overdone here, but that's okay. So a little bit darker there. I like that, because then we can bring some of this color in over in here and then lighten it up, as you can see already started to do. Just gonna get my brush a little bit more wet and then add a little bit of this like that. So a little bit of the sun's coming up, and so it'll be a little bit darker, these clouds on the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is just blend a little bit of this in here. So how does this look like a sky or landscape? It will, don't you worry. There's all kinds of different ways to approach this. I'm trying to do so in a way that builds things, specific sort of ideas, so you can see how they can possibly pop up. So and then we add a little bit more white into what we just mixed here. So we have some nice gray colors we mixed already, and we just kind of incorporate and use those as we add white along this whole page. Again, adding some of these grays, we'll use a little bit of water here and there, keep the brush fluid, and then pick up on some of these grays and then blend it in. And then you can see, rather than making a bunch of little poof balls in the sky, you start to get a layer of clouds that you often see in sky coverage. So, and then we'll keep doing a little bit of that, where we might add a little bit of green, some areas here, a little bit of our red, blend it in right there on the page. Now I'm using paper as opposed to canvas for these exercises, and it works pretty well, but it will absorb the paint quicker and make it dry a little faster. If you have canvas, you've got a little bit more hang time before it totally dries up. But as acrylics, it will tend to dry fast anyways. Add in a little white into these and then just blend. Add some water and then come in. We got some areas that are lighter than others, some that are darker, just like when we're looking at a sky that's covered in clouds. And I could be using a bigger brush to cover more area, but here we've got some motion, and we've got some, we get some little smaller variables and details that's this way. A little bit more red. Now we're just using, so far, I've just used the darker green and some of this red, a slightly cooler red. And then we'll see a big distinction when we start mixing some of the other greens together, and it's going to work really well, I believe, for our other areas, our ground and our flora. rocks, whatever it is that we find in our landscape. So again, I'm just adding some white. It's very red in there. A little bit more green. Very green in there. A little bit more red. It's a little bit more like it. Watery brush. A little bit more white. And again, we have some real interesting kind of cloud. Cloud ideas here, like the evocative colors for clouds. A little bit more white. You can add some white highlight on top of things here. Just kind of come on and paint them in. Come up and add some details later. We're not trying to go for a real specific representational image of our idea of what painted landscapes or clouds should look like. No, we are discovering. We are mixing colors, mixing grays, seeing what these combinations of color mixtures can do, and using those evocative feelings or whatnot, using those colors in our imagination to like that, to evoke another connection that we can have with our landscape or our world. And we one single brush, back and forth, no tricks, no like this brush is for this and you wipe this way and swipe that and go just adding the paint, mixing, and see what happens. So already look at that. We have an interesting, quick sky. It's got some, and I like how some areas have a little hint of green in there and a little red washed in. It's really adds for some interest in this sky. And look at this, with using green and red and white, that's it. We have colors that look like purple, almost like blue. When you see a little bit more of the red and green come out, they really pop out, and the rest of the colors become so much more neutral, so much more gray. So this is a nice start, I think. We're trying to do this pretty expediently. Okay, so let's try something else now. We've got a sky start there, I think is pretty cool. So we're adding now a real bright color. This is green. This is actually a fluorescent green. I really like using fluorescents as regular paints. The actual paint quality isn't, the thickness or whatever isn't always super great, but the color tone and the color, value is usually really strong, and it mixes very well with other colors. So since we're still close to the sky and we're more in the back, I'm not going to use my warm red yet to mix with this green. I'm going to take some of the cooler red and just take a good amount of it and mix it right in. We'll add some more green in there. And we're going to get this a much more subdued, darker green color. Look at that, red and a fluorescent green, and now we have this. I'm just going to kind of make a line of land here. Maybe there's some little hills that pop up. Try to make it a little farther away. Now I might come in with my brush edge and make these little kind of treetop feelings or whatnot, just to give this evocative. I've been using that word a lot this lesson. I wonder where that's coming from. But again, just to give a feeling of something in the distance. In fact, I think it needs to be a little bit more red, honestly. Really bring it back. This is very distant. Now, if I was out painting a landscape or something and I was using my full palette, I might grab some blue specifically and add to some of this, because blue is nice to, to add to your complements, when you're making colors that go in the distance. But here I'm just going to rely on my greens and my reds. It's a nice color though, really nice color. And then so we got that hill in the distance, but we're going to bring it out. So there's like a line of trees or something before the hill. So now the hill really looks in the distance. Take a little bit of our darker green now. Not too much, and just put a little bit more in front here just to give a little variation. It's not very defined. Is this some trees? Is this rocky land? Is it grassland? That's okay. We're just washing things in right now. As per usual, when I'm painting, I really don't have a real specific image in mind, or okay, this has to go here and there, and I'm going to paint this first. I really like to feel it. I think such a big part of painting and the fluidity of painting, finding it, discovering it, really, really appreciating it, comes from being able to flow with it, not having to have this very specific idea that you just regurgitate onto a canvas. But what does the act of painting, and what do the strokes tell you, and where does this all take you? I think it's very important. This is going to be interesting without any yellows. Oh yeah, I can use some white, can't I? So we are going to add a little bit of white in here. And it changes things for sure. Gives us even more distance. I'm going to do a couple more like that. These real distant kind of hills. Neat. And it's a bit much. So I'm going to still come in with this red. And some of this more of this green. Now, I'm not going to blend super a lot. I like that the red and the green aren't super totally blended, but the eye is going backwards. What is that? Does that even make sense? The eye is seeing the colors recede. You are seeing something that looks like it's in the distance by these reds and greens interacting with each other and that little bit of white the way that it is. Not totally blended. You're not really necessarily seeing big red dots and then big green dots as you back up. Well, I mean, you might be up close, sure, but then they blend together optically. All right. So we've got something kind of going on here that's evocative. Again, it's not a very specific landscape. I don't even know. I mean, might throw some trees in here. I really trying to make something, a setup for something that will allow us for some rocky lands or some sand. So this is why. Just let me show you something here. So now let's change things up a little. I'm going to get some brown out of this, as opposed to these darker greens or grays. God, those clouds turned out real nice. I want something a little bit warmer. All right, we're getting someplace here. Okay, so look at that big blotch of whatever. But we're going to see just how useful this color can be as an earthy color. Dirt area in here. We're going to make this all make sense too. So now, as I'm coming closer to the foreground area, I'm doing some more dynamic strokes. Different strokes it takes. Different strokes. And the idea, without yellow. The idea is that those strokes will create more, again, a sense of depth and distance. Makes the things up front seem like they're closer. And just sort of not even sure this is going to work out. Just kind of creating this foliagey area. And the idea is that by mixing these reds and greens together, you can get enough of a variation of your different colors, your different earth and flora colors, that you can evoke that image and the idea. You can channel it without having to be really specific in I'm painting grass or I'm painting trees. You just get that feeling. So I'm going to let this dry a little, because one of the things that's happening is I want to add a little bit more oomph, but it's getting muddy as I mix things in because I've got a lot of still wet, muddy colors in here. So I do want to have a little bit. So we have, without trying too hard, you know what? I don't know. Let me see here. We can make something happen here. I'm just, personally, as a painting, there's something bleak here, but there's something like, what is this supposed to be? Like, it could be so much more. So what I'm going to do here is add a little bit more of this green and also this green, especially this darker green. We're going to bring this out in here, and I think what we're going to do is, rather than have that be just a bunch of like this big dirt sandy area, there's something that just, the colors weren't really feeling quite right. If I had oranges and blues, for example, you can evoke a little bit more of that desert feel. What I'm going to do is, because we do get a real interesting mix of some cool grays, I'm going to mix some more, kind of like we did with the clouds. And then we'll have a little bit of a water, maybe a river or something in here. With all this red, trust me, it'll look watery enough by the time we get through. Without any blue, mind you. See, it's one of the reasons I wasn't going to do this in the first place, because it can be tricky, but it just led to this. I really prefer this to that muddy thing we were doing before. But I hope that you saw how cool those colors were. They were neat, rocky colors. We might bring some of them back in here for some of our, some branches and sticks and dirt and things like that. But in the meantime, I really want to bring out this kind of gray, chill, gray greenish water. Just a little bit more of that red here into some of these areas. Just by, you know, mixing some colors together, mixing some different grays and greens and browns and experimenting, we found us our little scene here. All right. It's always a little grayer, darker as it gets more backed away in here. Now we can come along, clean the brush a little here. That might help. It's gotten a little busy, shall we say. And let's come in here with some, again, just some of this lighter green up in through here, kind of like that. Just to give a little sense that there's some sort of plant life maybe here. Maybe it comes up a little like that. Highlights some of the dark in here. And then we'll come in with some more of this dark green and just again, it's a pretty thick pasty paint right now, and it doesn't layer super well on top of the wet paint, but we can get some nice mixing in and just bring out a few of these different colors and tones just to get us, you know, doesn't have to be perfect, but it gets a different sense of depth. We can, and we're doing this quick right now with just a single brush. We can come back in and add all kinds of different detail. We want this to be fun for all levels of painting. No matter where you're at, you can do something just by going burp, 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 mixing some colors together, your complements, and get something that looks like a scene. So, using some of this pure color here near the bottom. And then we're going to add, so mixing some of this red and green. For more of the brownish kind of a color, brown wood color. And then we're going to come in and put a little bit of that. So here, just not like we're painting branches, but we're adding some of that brown that could be branches, that blends in, that our mind might think, oh, branches are dark, colors are wood or sticks or those sorts of things. Shadows even. Add some of that in here. Oops. Just to give some little distinction. A little bit more green maybe in here. It's a nice little green bush thing here next to this other big thing. When you add white to this green, it's the way it lightens isn't quite as bold as if you were to add yellow, which I'm refraining from doing, but we'll still get it in there for some highlights and just kind of bring. Oops, I didn't like that. That's much better. That brings a little bit more light into the foreground, even though there's still some darkness in here. Add just a little bit more white, which has some green mixed in a little bit, just to bring out some little bit more action or whatnot going on in here, in the front, a bit more here in the back. Play around a little bit. All right, well, we got something out of here. And it definitely was starting to feel much more like there's some depth and some space in here. And just from mixing some complements, look, real quick, we can go in, we can add a bunch more highlights and different things. but we have a nice little scene. We only use green and red and white. Keep that in mind. We have these colors of skies, clouds, water. Only green, red, and white were used in here. So, come back in. Just bring a little bit of... And I don't want it to be totally flat. I want it to come up a little bit like natural land. So we have that little bit of shoreline or something going on in here. A bit more in some areas. Does it look like it's going back in some? Oops. And, you know, we're going to try one more thing. Just in here, since we have some white mixed in for highlights. In the other area, we'll add a little bit more in here to sort of help make them seem a little bit more like they're connected. They're being affected by the same light in the same scene. I like that. Can you see? Do you see? It definitely helps to bring things back into some perspective. So we have a decent enough sense of depth. It looks like there's some light that might be trying to come in and catch in here and in some of these areas. Like, you know how sometimes you can look at a scene, it might be cloudy, but there's a little light coming through and there's a little light area. That's kind of look like what it's happening here. And that's pretty cool. So, you know what? We have not a terrible little painting that we just made out of 3 colors. A little bit more up in here. I like that much better. See, now the eye is going in here and this brings back up in here. Okay, wow. It's amazing, amazing what 1 or 2 little strokes like that can do to help you pull the piece together. I don't want to overdo it. See, and it's also amazing what 1 or 2 little strokes can do to make a finished piece be like a now you're going to be on it for 3 more hours. So, anyways, we like what we've got going on here. Nice little landscape. All right. All right. Well, there you go. That's, you know what? There's something here. This isn't a bad little piece. Again, I just spent a little time mixing some reds and greens and whites together on this page and built a piece that's a little bit like a landscape. So we took these colors in the past couple weeks and have been mixing them together to see the different browns and grays and shades that we can get. And now we utilize the same techniques and the same ideas of spreading around the canvas and mixing colors on the paper to get this. We didn't do a lot of mixing in the palette. A lot of this is right on the paper. We could let it dry some, come back in here with a few more highlights and shadow to pop these things out some. We can bring in a few more different colors if we wanted to, but by using basically 3 colors, 5, 2 types of red, 2 types of green and white, we got this whole range of things that look like they can be in the distance and hills. Beautiful. I really like the sky. I think it's a really nice way of making a sky without trying to force clouds. You just mix your whites and your grays up in the sky and keep some areas darker and some lighter. We did something similar here with the water. One of the things that we saw happen in this piece was I started to make this, I wanted to go for a deserty kind of a scene or something that was a little bit more like dirt and hills. But it wasn't really, I wasn't feeling it. It wasn't working great. I didn't care for it. And I was able to turn that brownish color that I had and use some of it in with this other parts of the piece. But I turned it again into more like a river or a bit of a water scene without using any blue at all. And it was and I think that it turned out kind of okay. You know? So not a bad little way of experimenting with color and seeing what you can do with just a minimal amount of colors. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of experiment and experience, and that you keep painting and playing around with color. Next time we're going to look at blue and orange and do a very similar thing. Make a landscape piece out of just those colors. So until then, be well, stay healthy, and keep making art. Thank you all very much for your ear and your time.